So after Ajahn Chah had been living in the monastery for 4 years as a Dekwat, at the age of 13, he became a novice. So there is a lower age limit before you can become a novice. In fact, in the text, it says that a boy should be old enough to be able to scare crows away. So he was definitely old enough to do that, and he became a novice. And so, wearing the robe now, there was a little bit more expected of him in terms of his general deportment and study of the text, learning all the chanting that the monks had to do for the morning and evening services, and then for ceremonies, maybe going to take a meal in somebody's house and having to chant the Paritta blessings and so on and so forth. And he had, there was one monk in the monastery called Ajahn Lang, who was his mentor and his kind of teacher, and he was very close to him and looked after him. And when he used to go back to visit his home every now and again, Ajahn Lang would go along with him. And then when he was 16, which is kind of difficult age if you're living in a monastery and a young adolescent, Ajahn Lang one day said, "Look, why don't we disrobe? Why don't we leave? I think this is good enough." And so whether or not he would have stayed on otherwise, we don't know, but when your teacher encourages you to disrobe and say, okay. And it turned out that Ajahn Lang had fallen in love with Ajahn Chah's sister, and that was why he wanted to disrobe. I guess he would have been embarrassed if he disrobed and married Ajahn Chah's sister and Ajahn Chah stayed in the monastery. So, so they both disrobed. So then he didn't, it was okay, and he went to work helping his family, working in the rice fields and so on. And then getting a bit older, and he'd often go off to these festivals or ngans, and you can see already it's kind of tough. They would work all day in the fields with the buffaloes and so on, and planting rice and all those jobs, really kind of tough, hard work. And then in the evening they maybe walk 8, 9, 10 kilometers to another village for a ngan, stay there till late at night, walk all the way back, and then go to work again the next day. So then he was about I think 19, and he fell in love with a young girl, and she was the stepsister of his best friend called Put. And he and she pretty well decided that they would get married. But first of all, he had to do his national service, or at least expected to. There was you would take and if you got the wrong colour or the right colour, you go into the army. And then after he'd done his national service, he would. He decided to become a monk for a few months, and then they get married. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately maybe, firstly he didn't have to go in the army. But then he was walking through the fields one day, and he met his friend Put, and Put said, "I'm taking the lady." And what he meant was he was going to marry Jai, the young girl himself. Now, how this came about was that, as you know, Thailand's very unusual or almost unique in that there's not a dowry paid by the wife's family to the husband's family, but there's what's maybe called a bride price, where the husband's family pay the woman's family, which is one of the reasons why women have always had a lot more stable and respected position in Thai society than in most of the other societies around. And anyway, because they were in some way related, step-sister, step-related anyway, the family felt that if they married, that would keep the money within the family. And then it was also, they also had a piece of land that they wanted to cultivate, and so the idea was to marry, they would take on this piece of land. And so, as you know, in those days, and even to a certain extent these days in Thailand, the parents' wishes take precedence over the child's wishes, and so they married. And Ajahn Chah was very upset, but he wasn't angry with his friend because he knew that that's the way things work, and it was their family's decision. And it wasn't like his friend went behind his back and stole his girl or something like that. But he did confess many years later that the first 7 years he was a monk, he still thought about her, and who knows if his friend had died or they separated, he might. So anyway, he used to say he's really his friend Put, who became a disciple of his in later years, would go to the monastery almost every day, and he would point him out to the monks. He'd say, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here today, So